Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Burning Desire Show. And today I'm with Keith Strandberg. And it's an interesting story, this one, how this came to be. I was just talking to Keith just before this recording that photographs come up as memories, and one of them must have been your business card from when you worked for a magazine, a watch magazine. And I thought, oh, I'll see where you're up to. And then, hey, presto, it looks like you work for Bovet. And I'm like, they're super interesting. So I'm like, let's see if we can get this conversation. So we did, and here we are.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say and tell a little bit of my story. So thanks.
Absolutely. Well, the fact that you've graced us with your time a week before Watching Wonders, for those that don't know, it's the pinnacle of the watch industry's trade show, I suppose. Is like very, very grateful for that. And it's interesting because just today I was over in the center of Manchester, which is just like right behind me. And Watch of Switzerland have I didn't actually look at it, but they have a decent Bovet display there, and we're talking about it. And it was completely coincidental. And I'm like, oh, I'm talking to, yourself later on. I thought that's kind of bizarre. It is interesting, probably for a little bit late in the conversation, how now brands like yourself, brands like Moser, you never would have seen those in the center of Manchester 10 years ago. It may be 5 years ago. You
Yeah, I
know,
agree.
it's moved on. In fact, I actually remember Bovet as a brand. I forget who the fellow, I can see his face, his name escapes me right now, who he was. I'm sure he isn't now, I don't think, the kind of representative in the UK. And he was at my old house with a load of Bovets on my kitchen table.
Oh, interesting.
And my
Well, it's funny
ex-wife
you
had,
mentioned
yeah.
Manchester. I'm going to be there doing training the week after Watches and Wonders. So I fly in and out the same day, right after Watches and Wonders.
Oh, wow. Well, you're going here and back in the same day?
Yeah,
Oh,
Ethiopian Airlines. I've never flown them,
I
so
have done that, funnily enough. When I did the watch days, which was it's another trade show, but like
right.
niche. I flew Ethiopian also, and it's funny because you'll notice on the well, it did in Manchester. It didn't say Geneva. It said like I actually forget the name of their capital, but whatever that is. And I took a picture of it, and people were like, "Why are you going to Ethiopia?" I'm hoping this thing stops because if it doesn't, I've got a real problem. But yeah, there is this bizarre route that it takes, this Ethiopian Airlines.
It's the only direct, in fact, I think, that goes to Geneva.
You also have EasyJet do it too,
Oh, do you? Okay.
but just
Yeah.
maybe not on the day you're going. But anyway, we digress. So, like, I always wanted to understand with everyone that I speak to, the phrase from or quote from Steve Jobs that you can't connect dots going forwards, only backwards. I always find fascinating to understand someone's kind of background. And I always kind of the first thing I think about is like academics, like when you were at school, like, were you like, did you enjoy academics? Were there certain things you did do? Were you like, did you do your homework? Were you good at that? Did you hate school? Like, everyone has their own like relationship with that, right? It's the first thing you do outside of your parents' home.
Well, I enjoyed school very much. I went to a Jesuit high school, uh, and they're very academic, but also very free in the way that you learn and the way that you give back the knowledge that you learn. So I was really taught well at St. John's High School in Toledo, Ohio, where I was born. And then I went to USC, University of Southern California, for a year. My major was Chinese language and literature and physical education with a minor in Oriental philosophy.
Well, that's an interesting combination right there.
Then I transferred to Oberlin College in Ohio and finished out with those two majors and a minor. And then I started working as a journalist as well as a tour guide to mainland China. I
Wow.
took Americans because back then in the early 80s,
Wow.
people couldn't travel to China on their own. They had to go on a tour.
Ah,
So companies would hire graduates like me that spoke Chinese to take them around. So I did 9 tours of Americans in China.
wow.
And then through that, I started doing some journalism. And then I did some movie work and then focused on journalism again. And I was lucky enough to really specialize in watches, motorcycles, luxury goods, and Chinese.
Where did the kind of interest to like learn Chinese come from?
I started training in the martial arts when I was 13.
Right.
So I really got interested in the philosophy, and I had originally thought I'd major in philosophy. But once I got to Southern California, and I realized that I needed to study a language. And since Japanese came from Chinese, I thought I'd study Chinese, and then
Huh.
I fell in love with the language. So I still take classes every week just to keep my abilities up.
Is that Mandarin that you take?
Exactly, right.
Right. I suppose now, like, given the role that you're in, which we'll come to, like, and this is why I find it super interesting because, like, the fact at 13 that you got into martial arts leads you to studying Chinese. Now, I'm sure in your current occupation, that's super useful because the watch industry and luxury goods industry is a big part of Chinese culture. So,
Exactly. And Bovet is a nice, there's a nice connection with Bovet because Bovet started making timepieces for the Chinese market in 1822. And so China is a huge market and a huge historical touch point for us. So I do all the training in Chinese when I do it with our Chinese customers and our Chinese collectors. And then, we're going to be opening up some stores in China soon. So I'll be traveling to China to do that. So it's really turned out well.
that's what I'm saying. Like, if you're 13 years old, you could never imagine that martial arts would lead you into luxury watches. But like,
Yeah, at 13, I never thought I'd be living in Switzerland either. So
right. Also very true.
Ohio.
So, like, how did are you just super creative? Is that how the film side of stuff? Because I looked into kind of you spent like 30 years, presumably in between things, doing like film related stuff. Is that just because your creativity, you just decided to go down that road?
Well, when I lived in Taiwan for a year to perfect my Chinese. And while I was there, I thought, I saw a lot of really bad martial arts movies, and I thought, well, I can write something as bad as that. So I made contact with a company in Hong Kong who I still work with today. And we decided to make a movie that we could do together that combined an American story with Hong Kong style action. And so that was really successful back in 1986. And then I made another 9 movies with that company since.
Wow, wow. And then looking at the kind of journalist side, like, how did you fall into the watch side of stuff? Like, how did that come about?
Well, it's interesting because at the end of every movie, I buy what I thought was a nice watch.
Mm.
And actually, I was buying not so nice watches, but I thought they were nice watches. And
What do you call like not so nice, or what was
well,
nice to you at that point?
I was buying like a nice Seiko or a nice
Okay.
Citizen, but it wasn't super high end. It was
Yeah.
within my means.
Yes.
But it got me really interested in watches, and so in between movies, I was only at that time I was making a movie every 1.5 years. So I had a lot of time in between that I was still working as a freelancer, writing for a lot of different magazines. And I started making inroads into writing for watch magazines
This is in English or Chinese?
in English,
Okay.
exactly. And so I worked for a company called InSync for a very long time, for 25 years. And then I worked for Europistar, which is a watch trade magazine. I was their international editor, and then I was the US editor for Revolution for 3 years. And I continued to freelance for, like the New York Times and other big magazines, mass market magazines. And then I was approached by Bovet to help them tell the story of Bovet. And that, I was a big fan of Bovet anyway. I got to know the owner of Bovet, Mr. Pascal Raffi, when he first relaunched the brand in 2001. 2001.
Mm.
And then I actually bought myself a Bovet
Wow.
before I joined the company. So I was very happy to join the company and work with him to try to tell the story of Bovet.
That's awesome. So you just got into the watch side of journalism and it just kind of developed onwards. I'm interested when you were like editor of Revolution and those sort of roles, did you find certain brands' behavior towards you because you had an influence different to maybe when you were a freelancer? Did you find like a different approach?
But it's interesting because I was always a freelancer. Even when I was working for InSync, I was freelancing
Oh,
for like the New York Times and for Miami Herald and Hemispheres magazine and places like that. So it seemed like I became more important to the brands because not only could I cover them in Europa Star or
Ah,
Revolution, but I could cover them in these other titles.
makes sense.
You know, there's a bit of a problem with journalists and in egos in the watch industry, but I've been able to realize how small the industry really is. And, you know, even though we think we're important, it's, you know, in the grand scheme of things, you know, it's nothing compared to Hollywood or other big industries. I think we're just a very visible industry because when I fly, like I'll fly to Manchester and I'll see an ad for a watch. You know, there are ads everywhere for watches, so it's a
Yes.
very visible industry, but it's certainly not important like cars or movies or something like that. So
That's interesting. I think the watch business has been one of the biggest beneficiaries. We alluded to it. I forget if it was on the recording or previous. I think just previous to the fact that your brand now is in the centre of Manchester, represented along with lots of other smaller brands. A lot of people who aren't into watches might never have heard of. But
right,
back to my point, I think in the last 10 years, certainly 5, the implications and impact of social media, mainly Instagram, I would suggest, on the industry has been profound. And I don't think there's many other industries that have been as benefacted by social media. I think probably health and beauty is probably there, personal trainers looking and all that sort of stuff. But like product images, because it's just so photogenic that all you've got to do is just snap it. Like, or you sat in a shop, like just trying them on and you're snapping a picture. You're advertising for Amiga, Bovet, Rolex, whomever.
yes,
And I have a cigar club that I go to every other week or something in Manchester. And even last week, I can't even remember the brand name, if I'm honest with you. There's a Japanese watchmaker that presumably you might know, actually, given your kind of where you are in the industry. And he does a diffusion line. His normal stuff is, I presume, 5-6 figures. And this one was like 2 grand, right? And I looked at it and I thought, no way without social media, with anybody, one, know about this outside of close circles, and two, would they spend that money? But this
right,
person has spent that money because they'd seen the person or they'd seen someone talking about the person on YouTube. That's profound. That someone
right,
would watch something, and like to me, that's real influence. That's not like, oh, I've got some followers. That's like, no, someone's watched something and then has made a significant purchase decision for them, right? To buy something. Like that to me is amazing. And I don't think there's many other products that like have the visibility. I was showing a friend because a lot of people are interested because I'm in the watch business obviously and more in the secondary than yourself. And I was showing them. I think you did a quick search on hashtags on Instagram, and there's like 17 or 18 million posts.
oh boy,
And I said to them, probably 16.9 million of those posts. That's probably me. And similarly, you go on Reddit. I never really used Reddit, but I was just curious. And there's a group that's just like Reddit stroke watches, like that's the discussion the community, whatever they call it, on that platform. 2 million users.
wow,
So like, the industry is huge. And I think what's super interesting is you're now getting younger people that maybe don't have the means now. They're maybe 12, 15, 18, what have you. But like the seeds are being planted for them to want whatever said thing is. And I think as the world gets more and more robotic, metaphorically and physically, and AI, and people come out of touch with things, I actually think the watch becomes more important. And you've been around longer than I have, right? You know more about the quartz crisis and the Apple Watch. And I remember people going, not the quartz crisis, I wasn't born, but the Apple Watch, certainly people were like, well, this is it. Like, no one's ever going to buy a watch anymore. And I'm like, you're so wrong. And I remember there's a photograph of me when I won an award for Watch Pro, which is a big title over here.
yeah,
And I had the Apple Watch just come out, and I made a conscious decision. I put my Apple Watch on my right, and I put my Cartier on my left.
there
And
you go,
that photograph is still there. And because it was just like representative of what's going on, and what I've actually found, and I think is actually the case. Apple, of course, is the number one selling by units watches. Fine, we expect that, but it's actually led people who would never normally look at a watch to look at a luxury watch now because
right.
I
I
feel
think they
like they're
got used
putting.
to wearing something on their wrist.
Yeah, but they don't want to wear it in a meeting or with a tuxedo or whatever.
Yeah,
And they may be getting tired of notifications, but they like the fact of having something on the wrist. Or, it might be someone who's into technology and they're into like the detail and they start to go, hold on a minute. these watches, like the detail of how these movements are crafted and why, what this means, and the history and the heritage, there's not much of that left in lots of companies. Like
Right.
tech companies don't have, like no one thinks about the history of Apple. Let's be honest. No one thinks about the history of Microsoft. I've never thought about this till I'm just speaking it right now, but that you don't think about that because those companies are always just moving onwards. So like, it's chat GPT. So like Microsoft Office might become irrelevant in 5 years. No one's going to go, oh, let's use Microsoft Excel because that'd be cute and quaint. Like, no, you don't do that. But with watches, of course, it's a whole different beast. And I say, I don't think there are many asset classes or many items. I'm obviously hugely passionate about this that are close to it. People might argue, spirits, wines, but like you can't enjoy those. Like you just got to either watch them or drink them, and then it's gone.
That's right.
Artwork, okay, maybe, but you can't take it with you, i.e., like around and about. So I just don't think there's many things that are as portable, wearable, have a physical reason. And the biggest thing for me is like the philosophically, like time, like is the most important thing.
Right.
Like, so I think as a representation, you're exposed to, as I am, the higher echelon society, the wealthier in society, like appreciate that. And that's why they actually appreciate the timepiece. You made some really interesting point about films, right? Every time you finish a project, you bought something. Kevin Hart was with Grant Cardone talking about backwards and forwards. And if you saw this, I clipped it. And he said, Grant Cardone says like, or someone like, why do you buy expensive watches? Kevin Hart has a pawn shop for like AP and Pateks and these things. And he's like, he goes, the what I do, he says, say the film like grosses $1 billion. He goes, I buy myself a timepiece, like to remember the effort that was put into it, what happened, and all the rest of it. Like it's a marker. And then, with watches as well, and like many other things, they're small enough that you can have a lot of them in a very small place and they
That's
can
right.
mark different things. So, yeah, for many reasons, I am convinced that this industry is going nowhere, but a trajectory of upwards. There'll always be peaks and troughs, of course, but I think
Right.
in general, I mean, you listen, what's happening in your world? Because explain to people who don't know, like, what is Bovet, price point, like, where does it sit in the market?
Well, Bovet is really at the high end of the market. We manufacture more than 95% of everything that goes into our timepieces. In fact, we don't use the term Swiss made, we use the term Swiss handcrafted
Okay.
because we're higher than Swiss made. Swiss made is 60% of the value, and we're 95% or more of
Mm.
everything that goes into the timepiece. So we're kind of at the higher end. I think our opening price point is 26,000 Swiss francs, and we go up to more than 1 million.
Would
So
you say like, and then this is a very hard question to answer, but maybe from your journalistic head, you might know the answers or give some allusion to it. Um, you look at a Rolex or an AP or a Patek or Cartier and Omega. Like, what percentage of that would you say is actually handmade v machine made? Like, does anyone really know, or is it just guesses at this point?
it's just guessing. I think the Rolexes and the Seikos and they're very high production. Rolex, they don't release the figures, but it's probably over 1 million timepieces a
Yeah,
year.
for
You know,
sure.
you can't hand make 1 million timepieces a year. It's a great watch. It's a great movement. But they're assembled in a different way than the way that we do it.
Yeah.
We make about 1,000 watches a year.
Hmm.
And we do all the processes inside, including the hairspring. So we make the hairspring ourselves, and there are only about 5 or 6 brands in the Swiss industry that make their own hairsprings.
Who would the others be for people?
Well, there's Jaeger, there's Patek makes their own hairsprings. H. Moser does their own hairsprings, so they're only a handful. So we do that ourselves, which we determined to be really important. And there are very few companies that do everything that we do for the volume that we do it. AP's at a much higher volume than we are. And I think you hit on a really interesting point about the fact that Bovet might be in Manchester and there are other independents. I think this is a real renaissance time
Mm,
for independence.
agreed.
People are tired of the same old, same old. Everybody's got an Omega, they've got a Rolex, they've got all these different brands. Now
Yes.
they're looking for something else. I've met a lot of collectors over the years that have hundreds of Rolexes, and the thing I ask him is, well, why would you buy hundreds of Rolexes that just all of them look just about the same? Why wouldn't you buy other things that look different. And I think there's a real difference between people that collect because they love it and people that collect to try to make money off their collection.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And we try to target the collectors that love timepieces. And
Yes.
as you said, they mark their timepiece, they mark their lives with their timepieces. I have an Apple Watch. I can't remember when I bought it. I didn't buy it to mark an event,
That's
but
such an interesting point. Like I literally just bought an Ultra 2, and this is talking about not marking things. I had no idea. I thought it was 10 years old. No idea. And I looked into it, it's only 5 years old. Like you know what I mean? But it's already like its utilization is not where it needs to be. Uh,
right,
but yeah, you're right. No one buys that as like, oh, like, well, maybe some people do, but it's not really the point, is it? I get
right.
that's
And
interesting.
I think Apple Watch, I shared your opinion that I thought it would help watches because I teach at a university here in Switzerland 1 day a week, and none of my students wore watches. And because they had their phones and that's what they needed for the time. But when people started wearing Apple Watches, then they realized, well, the Apple Watch is a gadget, really. It's not something you can wear to a board meeting or you can wear
Yeah.
to an important thing. So then they started thinking about watches because they already had the habit of wearing something on the wrist.
Yes.
That really helped watches, didn't hurt it at all.
No, I completely agree. I'm really interested as well because I just looked at some of the history as well. It was a brief period, granted, but you did, or you were rather, the chief content officer over at Jacob and Co. as well,
Great. Yes. So
which I'm very familiar with the UK distributor Jacob and Co. So I've kind of got quite a good exposure to that brand, and that's another interesting kind of like how did that come about? What were you working on? Where was the brand at that point? Because I didn't write down like can't remember what period you were at that point. It
I
seems
think I worked for Jacob 5 years ago.
okay.
And I helped, now they have a tagline that's inspired by the impossible. And that was something that, when I met with Jacob, and I knew Jacob very well,
Mm,
uh, and I was always impressed with his audacity. He came up with things that people could never think of.
yes.
Bovet sort of does that as well. They think of new things that haven't been done before. And I really like that in the watch industry because there's so many brands that just do the same thing they've always done. They change the color of the dial or something like
Yeah,
that.
I was joking today in one of the watch stores, Manchester, and I said, next week is obviously the Watch and Wonders, as we said, and I said Rolex will change something by a point of a micron, and people will lose their mind. It's exactly what I was waiting for. It was just the depth was that point of a micron different, and now they've changed the Pantone of that red. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sold.
They change the font or they move superb
Wild.
odometer to another place, and they have to have it. And I don't understand. I love Rolex. I think it's a great watch.
It's a herd mentality.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm wearing one. It's a beautiful, I think it's 1980s. And I do like them, and I don't think any less of people that don't. But I saw something interesting. I don't know. Again, this is a very watch related podcast, but it is what it is. This particular episode, and it was a somebody's like collection, and it was just basically all GMTs or subs and whatever else. Like, if your collection looks like this, you're not a watch collector. And,
Right.
and it's kind of true. Like I've got friends that invest in watches, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like, don't call yourself a watch collector if all you're asking me when you shall I buy or not buy, what's the residual? Like
Yeah.
that's like saying, you're into cars, but you're only buying a Prius with 80,000 miles on the clock because it's already hit the worst it's going to be, and you're only going to lose £500. It's like
Right.
that's not a car collector.
Right.
Going into it, buying a Lamborghini, it's going to be $200 a week on fuel. It's going to be X, Y, and Z. It's going that like that. If you don't, you shouldn't be buying the car.
That's right. Yeah,
Um,
people, when I talk to collectors, I love talking to the collectors that love every little detail about the time,
yes.
and they talk about the complications and they talk about the way it's finished. And, that's the sort of collector I really enjoy talking to. And I'm fortunate to do a lot of presentations to collectors. When somebody comes to Switzerland, I give them a tour of the factory and a tour of the castle where we do the final assembly because
Wow.
we're based in a 14th century castle. That's where my office is. Not
Oh,
today, I'm
wow.
working from home,
Wow.
but we're in
I
a
was going to
castle.
say, this doesn't look very castle-like, Keith. It's a modern castle. Is that what they call it?
That was a castle that was from the 14th century, and it was actually owned by the Bovet family
Wow.
for a period of about 100 years, and that's why Mr. Raffi bought it.
So what? So I didn't know, or I don't know much about the owner. Like, what was the? Did he buy the name in 2001 and like wanted to resurrect it, or was it already work? Like, what was the kind of history of this brand?
Well, it had been resurrected already in
Okay.
the traditional case with the bow at 12, bow and the crown at 12 o'clock. Um, and so he was approached in 2001 by the owners of the brand to invest in it.
Okay.
Because he was already a Bovet collector. He
I
wasn't in the
see.
watch industry. He was in the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
So they contacted him, knew that he loved Bovet, and he said yes, he'd be interested in doing it, but he wanted to do it right. He wanted to bring everything back in-house. So in 2006, he bought the factory, the
Mhm.
manufacturer, and in the same year he bought the castle. So we do the movement manufacture in Tramelan, Switzerland, and then we do the final timepiece assembly in Motier, Switzerland, which is about an hour between the two.
And is he like hands-on, or has he got other business and he's hands-off?
He's super hands-on. We introduced a timepiece today called the Recital 28 Prowess 1. And he's so hands-on that it was ready last year. And he said, oh, we've missed one thing. We have to go back to the drawing board and change it. And there was almost a revolt in the technical office because they were like, no, Mr. Effie, it's ready. Let's just release it.
How minor is this thing? Is it just a part of the movement or something, or like just a?
No, it was a major thing because it's a world time watch, and as you know, there's a problem with daylight saving time. As soon as daylight saving time comes, all world time watches are not correct. Like Dubai is only 2 hours instead of 3 hours, and so on every world time watch, Dubai's wrong, China's wrong, every city in Japan is wrong because they don't change to daylight saving time. Well, the Prowess One fixes that.
Oh
It can be
wow,
adjusted so that every world time zone is correct.
that's wild.
Yeah.
Is that the
So
first time that's been done?
it's a problem that we really didn't even pay much attention to, all of us. We were like, oh yeah, it's not right. Oh, so well. But now that we've changed it, people are like, yeah, you're right. Why do we accept that for so long?
Yeah, Ryan. It's not like you're paying pennies for a world timer at this point.
Exactly.
That's wild. So what's the retail on a world time on this particular?
That is going to retail in titanium for 650,000 Swiss francs.
Wow,
And in platinum, it's 690,000. So
wow,
it's a major timepiece. We can only make 8 a year.
eight.
So 8, yeah. It's
Jeez,
got I think 744 components. So
wow.
it's really quite complex. And hopefully if you come to see us, I'll show it to you when you
No,
come.
I 100% will be coming to see you. No, no, no.
Okay. Okay.
I yeah, I explain to people the industry, and obviously a lot of my clients are Rolex people, and I'm the other brands too, but Rolex of course is huge. The numbers that came out from the report from Morgan Stanley and whomever else put it together, um,
Right.
they don't really tell the full picture because they showed Rolex having a 30% share. But then again, like I think that was by value, which
Right.
isn't necessarily true because of how, the other brands, they have like Swatch in there. They have all these, it's very convoluted. But I know from my own self, like from the inquiries we get from all different sources, like it's plus 90% Rolex.
Right.
To me, that's a real shame
Yeah.
because like I had someone this morning say, "Hey, I have 10,000 to spend. Like, what's around?" And I'm like, "There's so much. There's so much, but like you just have to be prepared to go off piece." And I do think, in fact, this fellow's comment was, "I want something that's not the same as everybody else." Because you've got
Ah,
Breitling, and he's like, everyone's got this watch. And I do think, and I have thought this for a while, and I think part of my progression with the business that I'm in is to move people and show people, at least give them the breadth and just show what's available. Like a brand that I'm hugely fond of is Laurent Ferrier.
yeah.
And you can pick up a Laurent Ferrier on the secondary at like 20,000. Like 20,000 for that? Like that's unbelievable value. I strongly believe that'll be 50 or 60 starting in a few years' time when people start to go, this guy with a Patek for 30 years. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was the dial or dial specialist for them.
And
I
he worked
think,
at Patek for a number of years.
yeah,
Exactly.
it was 30 years, but I'm 90% sure it was the dials that he worked on. I think it was what he did. I've met him. I met him with the watch days, like super nice, speaks no
Yeah,
English.
he's a great guy.
But I used to speak French, so I like kind of like halfly understand. No, I used to be fluent. It's a shame. Like if I'd have known that it would not, it's like similar to yourself. I didn't do it for any reason, but like if I'd have known that I'd be in the watch business in the way that I am, I probably would have like kept it up a bit more. Maybe I should get back into it because of
Get
course,
back up. Yeah, it'll be easy, I think, for you.
yeah, it should be. It should be. Has been now 13 years, but you know, I think I'd probably figure it out. But then also it's interesting is like with my watchmaker, he's looking at doing a brand himself, super high end, probably Bovet level at a point in terms of how much hand finishing and how much of in-house is done. And so we're working on that, and that's super interesting for me because I'm a mainly a watch collector first and foremost. So for
Right.
me to like have a project that's going down that road is super interesting. And you
Oh,
saw
there's
like a brand like Fleming, you know, if you don't know if you saw these guys the other day,
yes. Uh-huh.
like super interesting because again, without Instagram, like where's that getting? You couldn't start something because you don't have the marketing dollars to get it to the right people. But now you don't need that. Now,
Right.
if you have the right proper influential people within the industry and you're doing something of note, it gets picked up.
And I think to continue on that line of thought, Instagram also increases people's awareness of what else is out there. So they may have started with a Rolex,
Absolutely.
started with an Omega, and they're wearing it, and then they're looking at Instagram, like, oh, I didn't know this was out there. Oh, I didn't know this was out
I make a conscious effort to, because for me this is not about money. Like this is, I do very nicely and have a great lifestyle, no question about it. But like I am very passionate about the industry, and like there's a guy that I came across, extremely niche. I don't even know what the production number is. A guy called Remy Cools, might
there.
pronounce that correctly. He's like this young watchmaker, and it makes no sense how he's possibly able to do what he does, but like it's just beautiful. It's very French, Breguet-ish, I would maybe say, looking stuff, and it's amazing. And
Yeah.
I'll post about it, and I've got no financial association. In fact, if you buy one from him and not from me, I'm losing out. But like the point is, I don't care because I want people to see because
Right.
you know, it's a nice place to be. I'm pretty trusted in the industry around my client base. And it's just to show them like, hey, like, yeah, it's cool that Rolex made a titanium Yachtmaster, but like there's other stuff out there. And
Right.
I love what they do, and I think they do a great job. And you know, they are first and foremost a marketing machine. And they know exactly what they're doing. They look at the market. You know, they've got into that CPO, the kind of, for those who don't know, the kind of secondary market they've started to get into. And it's
Right.
really funny actually, because many years ago, 2017, so what we're talking now, we're talking 7 years,
So, yeah.
six stroke 7 years. There was an article written about me because I was on a business television show in the UK. Well, you'd know it from the States, The Apprentice, but the UK.
Yeah. Okay.
I was on that. And Watch Pro did an article about me. I'd won their, I'm not trying to brag here, but I'd won their Retail Titan Award in 2015. So I was
Okay.
already a known entity in the industry. And then I said to someone this morning, which is kind of cool. I didn't realize till recently properly that both my maternal and paternal grandfathers were watchmakers, working watchmakers.
Wow.
Yeah, for someone that's not based in Switzerland, like that's pretty unusual.
That is unusual. That's
so so I guess he was destined that I'd come into this industry at some point like this. But they did an article and they were asking what my business was because The Apprentice in the UK became the Donald Trump equivalent. A guy called Lord Sugar would invest in your company, and
okay.
that's what I was trying to do. And at that point, the pre-owned market was here. Like, don't get me wrong, and the secondary market was here, but it was nowhere near what it is now. There weren't as many Instagram traders. There weren't as many, like, it just wasn't as big anywhere near. And I said, that was back before Brexit, if I'm not mistaken. I said, well, you know, I'm pooling money, which is something I actually do now, but in a different way. And I'm going to go to Europe and I'm going to do this, that. I knew that I'm going to buy from authorized stocks in Greece and in bulk. And that was what people used to do. And And it's funny because they vilified me, totally vilified me, made me out as if I was like doing something totally illicit.
Oh,
And like, but back then, this is how much the industry's changed. Back then, the sponsors of Watch Pro were all the brands.
yeah,
Now, the sponsor of Watch Pro is the 1916 company, is eBay, is Watchfinder, is all the secondary people. So
right.
for many years, that article disappeared because it basically made their advertisers look bad because it was basically what it was saying. It's actually now back, the article. I've
Oh, that's
noticed.
good.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. But yeah, they vilified it, and that's how far the industry's moved since 2017 in just 6, 7 years. And now the fact that Rolex themselves, you know, the behemoth in the secondary market, is playing and obviously buying Boucherer in Europe, which is like a big uh,
Right.
watch store for those that don't know. It's
Well,
just
it's interesting because the brands were really afraid of the secondary market at
yes.
first, and then they decided to go into it with both feet and do
Well,
their.
listen, look in the UK, Watchfinder is owned by Richemont, which
Yeah,
people know
that's
is
right.
Cartier, is Jaeger or JJ, is Panerai, is
Right.
IWC. But
Yeah.
the funny thing with what Richemont don't understand is just because you own £100 million revenue business, the biggest in the UK, legitimately, there'll be some others, I'm sure, but the biggest that I know of, doesn't mean that you can then have 300 IWCs for sale, and then that's going to start becoming a big thing. Like
Right.
all of their brands, if you look at this, this is true, and you filter by their brands, they have an outrageous amount of inventory that no legitimate watch dealer would ever carry that amount, but they have to because they're brands. So it's
Right.
kind of funny. Like I look at it and I'm like, it's just
And I think big brands are often they see the secondary market as a way to dump stuff that didn't sell too,
yes.
and call it secondhand, but it's really firsthand. It's really new stuff that they're just trying to offload.
Yeah, well, I talked to, again. I went into watch store before, authorized store before, and I said to them, and I have this belief in life. This whole attitude that for me to win, you have to lose, like in whatever category, professional or personal, nonsense.
Yeah.
Like there's almost always a big enough pie for everyone to eat out of if people aren't greedy. And it's the biggest pet peeve of mine is when I see greed in any form across, as I say, personally, professionally, it's a huge red line to me. I'm like, there's no need for it. You know, there's always room in a deal, or there should be, for all parties to do well and to feel that they've done well. And no one should be getting fleeced or, you know, underplayed or something underhand. Like it never ends well. And I just don't see the point in it because everything that I'm trying to do is all about longevity. It's all
Right.
about how do you have clients for 20 years, 50 years, and the kids want to buy from the business, that kind of thing. And building a business like that long term. I mean, I was just reading Jeff Bezos's book. Well, it's not his book, but about the formation of Amazon by Brad Stone, the Everything Store. Extremely interesting. And like it kind of ends and it explains like this lady who was his CFO right at the early doors said that it was almost like he fired an arrow to the destination and he just followed an arc.
Oh,
Like his long, like, and then this book is written in 2012, and or I think that's where it's kind of it may be published later, but I think that's where it kind of cut. And in 2012, they were raving about Amazon doing $69 billion annual revenue. Quarter 4, 2023, I checked it up, was $169 billion.
oh man.
Bezos' net worth in 2012 was 25 billion. It's now 200 billion. Like or every metric, and it's interesting because it gives you like it's kind of wild actually. Brad Stone's like, here's the things that I think Amazon will do in the future. They've nailed everyone.
Oh,
Like
really?
he's like, I think they'll get to same day if not next day delivery. I think they'll do this. I think they'll move into that. And you're like, this is crazy. But like that's how simple like Jeff Bezos made it. It's like it's very simple what I'm trying to achieve. I want everything in the world to be sold via this platform. That's it. And obviously spawn off AWS and various things, but like it's really interesting to me, like that simplicity and clarity of vision and purpose. Most people don't have. Most people have like so many things they don't really know. They flip flop around and they never really commit to something that's like that simplistic. But like in my opinion anyway, all the greatest entrepreneurs, business owners, whatever, have a really simple raison d'etre, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, and
Hey, it's interesting that you talk about, that people don't have to lose, because my quibble with people like Watchfinder and Watchbox, in order for them to make money, somebody's got to lose.
yes,
And I asked this to the guy that's the head of Watchbox. I said, how does this platform? I think it works for retailers, because retailers want to move, they want to move stuff they take in and trade. So they don't mind losing a little
for
bit
sure, for
on the
sure.
stuff they take in and trade. But a person like you and me that wants to sell something, we're going to have to get paid less than it's worth in
Yes,
order for Watchbox or Watchfinder to make
yes,
money
yes,
reselling it.
yes,
And I never thought that was a great model, because, I don't want to think I'm getting ripped off when I buy something.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something. So I occasionally have to deal with that. Um, the way I look at it is, when I'm selling someone something, I'll never promise something, right? So like someone says to me, what watch going to hold value? Well, I'm like, well, it's like being a stockbroker. It's like,
Mhm.
well, based on past performance, like probably this. But like at the same time, who knows? For some reason, people might not want to buy those watches. There might be a glut of them. New CEO of Rolex goes, I want to make 5 million watches a year now. I don't care about the secondary. Or I
Right.
want to make 100,000 watches. I want to pull back, and you just don't know.
Right.
So it happens more with other brands, right? So if you're selling a Panerai, or you're selling or something like this, it does happen. But I actually think people are aware of that. And I say, I do make them aware of that. Like if they're going to ask me, like, I'm never, ever going to tell a lie and say to someone, that's the other thing I refuse to do in any walk of life. Someone's buying like right now a Frank Muller or whatever it is. I'll be like, beautiful watch. Yeah, I get it why you're buying it. But like, don't come back to me next year and like ask for near, like it's not going to happen. You have to
Right.
understand like where this is.
Well,
Same.
people should buy watches because they love them,
And
not
you should. And
because.
if you want to, if I see someone like me as being a source to help you, to advise you, to show you other things that you might not have considered,
Right.
to very consultative to understand what it is you're looking for. Like, what's the point of this watch? Like,
Yeah.
is it you run a statement piece to like so for you that you've made something of yourself? Like, is that what it is? Is it that it's your daughter's birthday and this, whatever it is? And then on the other side of it is to provide liquidity in the market. That's why I think secondary is really important, because the likes of Rolex would not sell like they would without people like me. Because
Yeah.
if you can't liquidate, if this watch on my wrist has no value to anybody and I have no way of selling it, like I guarantee less people are going to be buying those things.
Yeah.
Far less people, like
Yeah.
probably a tenth, who are the real people that I really want to buy them, to wear them, to keep them. Like I have this in my father all the time. I'm like, I see a watch that works in a part exchange deal, and like, I'll just keep it. It's like, why? I'm like, you don't get it. Like, it's the money's irrelevant. Like the money, like, oh, I can always make more of that. But like, can I get this watch again?
Right.
Like this one of one, or this like super unusual, like the one I'm wearing now. Like this is a kind of standard Rolex, but in the same time, it's not, because normally this is a date, and it's just a date just on presidential.
Right.
And then also the dial, it's hard to see. So I'm going to take it off and show you. Is like a linen type effect, which is just a really sweet little touch.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. I
So it
like
has
that.
all these little details that like you just don't see. And there's a part exchange deal, and yeah, I could have more money in a bank account, but it's like this is I get so much enjoyment looking at this thing.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
That's
the
what
thing.
watches are all about, is to get enjoyment by looking at them.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's what I kind of say to people is, again, back to your point about someone taking a hit. Um, it makes me uncomfortable sometimes. Like when I had a client that bought a Jackie Droz, for example,
Right.
and I could barely get them a tenth of what they paid.
Right.
Like that's hard. You know what I mean? Like if I'd have sold it them and I'd said, oh, and been a snake oil salesman and gone, oh, don't worry, it's like
Hold its
that,
value. Yeah.
that's completely different. But like, actually, what I've helped that person do is get them into something they really want. So I look at it like that side of it. And as I say, I think most of my clients, I'm very fortunate and blessed and grateful, because they understand and they're sensible. They know I have to make a crust. They know what I do for a living. They know I give them the best advice I can.
Right.
But they're not going to like wound me if like this, that, and the other, because I'm never gonna tell you something that I don't believe is true at the time, and I haven't got something to back it up with, whether it's experience or my expert knowledge or just know-how of the market. You do
Right.
get, as I'm sure, well, maybe you're not exposed to it as much. You do get people who think they know more, and some do. Some definitely do, but like sometimes I'm like, it's like trying to say to a hedge fund manager that you understand more about the deal he's doing. It's like he's spending more time and he's got more experience locked away than you're ever going to in your life, because you just do this as like a side. I like to buy a watch. I do this every single day and I've been doing it for decades, like in different guises.
Yeah,
So
sometimes I have collectors who come on a tour and they think they know more than they do, and it's really hard to correct them without
yes,
making them feel bad.
yeah, you don't want to, but like you don't want them to also. It's also you don't want them to think they know something and be regurgitating stuff that's just incorrect.
So that's why I do the training with the retail salespeople, like I'm doing in Manchester, because very often, especially with uh, multi-brand boutiques, you know, the the retail salespeople can't know as much about every brand as they do about the brands that they know the best.
Yeah.
So they often will get a collector in that does know more than they do.
Yes, that's
That's a
very
difficult
interesting.
situation for retail salespeople
It
person.
is. It definitely is, and it happens every time I go in a watch shop. Is the truth.
I know.
Because I don't actually. Well, I do know an awful lot, obviously, but like I'm not. There's people that know far more than me. Like
Oh,
I'll sit with clients, and I'm humbled. Like I know they know more than I do about, because I'm not technically minded. So you start talking to me about how the mechanism works. Like let me introduce my watchmaker. You want to talk about the market and the economics behind it and all that? Like I'm all for it. So that's why we work pretty well together. Um, but yeah, you just have. I remember years ago, like in a different industry, in the car industry, and I was thinking about this. Like the car that I wanted to buy at the time, I had researched and knew more about,
right.
obviously, than the car dealer, because he has to know, or she has to know,
All the different
50
cars.
different things, 50 models, blah, blah, blah. And so with the internet, that has become a thought in someone's side, that people come into your store, they know what price that watch should be. They know what, like this, that, and other. But to me, that's no issue, because I'm fully transparent and I know what I'm doing is the best of my ability, and I'm prepared to be wrong. But like I
But
think
that's the important thing is that, you know, when I train the salespeople, I don't want them to ever just answer a question that they're not sure they know the answer to. If they
yes.
don't know, they say, "Oh, I don't really know, but I'll find out for you.
Yeah, let me look it up, take your email or
Let me
WhatsApp,
call
and
Keith
I'll.
and find out."
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, let me call the brand and like let me figure out the exact
Right.
how this works and why this works. Yeah, it's the worst thing is people just making it up, like and
Oh,
just
yeah. When I was a journalist, I'd go into these product presentations and they'd say something. I'd be like, that doesn't sound right. I said, are you sure about that? There's there was one guy, I don't know if you remember, there was a watch band that came out and Dennis Rodman was the spokesperson for this brand.
yes,
And it was a famous designer of crazy cars back in the 60s. And I'm blocking on the name right now, but the designer had died. And so I was in a meeting with this guy and I said, oh, you know, how's it, where do you get the designs from? They said, oh, we still get design. It was Arlen Ness. And he said, we still get designs from him every day. And I said, you get designs from Mr. Ness himself? He's like, yeah. I said, really? Well, do me a favor. Could you get me an interview with him? And they went, oh, I'm sure that's possible.
no
So
way.
he goes back into the back room and then he comes out a couple minutes later. He's like, Arlen Ness is dead. I was like, yeah, no shit.
Oh my gosh,
That
that's a
often
real
happens
clanger.
that people, you know, they don't want to look stupid, so they make up an answer. And you know, I'm happy to look stupid because I'm often looking stupid, you know, because I'm not super technical either. So if somebody asks me, you know, why do we use this hertz rate instead of that hertz rate? I'm like,
Oh, you've lost
but I'll
me.
find out.
You've already lost me. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But I'd be the same. I'd be like, let me call my watchmaker.
right.
He'll know and
Yeah.
he can explain it in simple terms, and then I'll get back to you, and vice versa. He'll do the same. So yeah, I think that's it's a big takeaway for people, is that like if you don't know, like don't make it up. Like just you're not a politician, right? Like just you don't need to make it up for votes. Like
That's exactly right.
far more sensible to just say, I'll go back to you, let me get the correct information. And a way to do it is just like, yeah, I have an idea, but like I want to get it right. So let me just go back and, there's a way of putting it across that that doesn't make you look too daft.
And I really like talking to people, to collectors, and even people that don't know much about watches, because it's like you and I, if you give us 5 minutes with somebody, we'll get them excited about
Yes.
mechanical watches because they don't really know anything about it. And they don't understand why somebody would pay 5,000 or 10,000 or even
Yeah.
$100,000 for a watch when they could buy a Timex for $10.
Yes.
And you know, if they give you or I 5 minutes with them, then they'll understand and they'll be like, oh, that's amazing. I never knew that.
Yeah, it happens frequently, to be fair. There aren't even when you find, even when people aren't themselves interested, they're interested to know why everyone else is interested. That's
Right.
what's interesting. I've said interesting a few times there, but that's what I find fascinating is that it's not like fly fishing, no offense to the fly fishing community, or like, I don't know, like tea or something where like people are like, you're either into it or you're not.
Right.
People are fascinated, like with stocks and shares or whatever it is, because there's the financial element to it. There's all of their wealthier friends or successful friends seem to have an interest or know about it or have bought them, or so there's always this desire and thirst to know more. And I find this is the biggest blessing and curse of what we do, I think, is that I'm never switched off because I go to the cigar club or I go wherever and guess what everyone wants to know? What's on your wrist, Charles? Oh, can you tell us about this? Like, how's this doing? What's this brand saying? Like, and inevitably I'm back at work, but like I'm never not at work because
Oh, we
that's
love what
the
we
trouble.
do, Charles. So I mean, come on.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
the trouble with loving what you do. Like, and that people don't see that. I don't just switch this laptop down and like done. Like, it just never happens.
Yeah, we don't live that kind of life, do we?
No, no. Well, listen, I'm conscious of your time. I know you've got a million things to do before watching Wonders. Hopefully,
This
I
has been a
will.
real pleasure, I gotta say.
Well, I thank you very much. It's likewise. It's been real fun. And thanks for finding the time because like I know how crazy this industry is, particularly for you at this time. So even more so. And yeah, as I say, I'll definitely outside of this give you a conversation, speak to you rather about when I'm over in Switzerland, 100%.
Okay, please do. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.